What's going on, everybody? Kalupis Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be doing a quick comparison between the Motorola Moto G Power 5G and the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE. Now, if you do end up wanting to learn more about either phone individually, definitely check out the description where I will be linking to several other videos about them, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But with that being said, let's get into it. So with the Moto G Power 5G, we're getting a 6.5-inch 120Hz IPS LCD display with a 1080p resolution and a PPI of 405. With the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE, we're getting a 6.4-inch 120Hz dynamic AMOLED display, and this phone also has a 1080p resolution and a PPI of 411. So in general, these displays are actually pretty similar, but on one hand, the Moto G Power 5G is slightly larger at again 6.5 inches versus 6.4 with the S21 FE. But on the other hand, with a dynamic AMOLED versus an IPS LCD, the S21 FE is going to have significantly better image quality. As you can probably tell, it's a bit brighter, the colors are also a bit more vibrant, and the viewing angles are significantly better here. So if you're outside, for example, or really in any kind of bright area, the S21 FE is going to be a lot easier to see. Now for storage, with the Moto G Power 5G, we're getting 256GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion, but keep in mind this phone in my hand is the factory unlocked version, and if you get this phone through a US carrier, chances are it's only going to be 128 or maybe worst case scenario even 64, but I can't imagine it being that low. Point is, if you do want 256GB of storage from this phone, I don't know about the others, but the factory unlocked version at least definitely does have this much. Now with the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE, we're getting 128GB, or at least with this version, but unfortunately with this phone, there's no microSD card expansion. Now, keep in mind, similar to the Moto G Power 5G, there are plenty of other variants of the S21 FE, some of which do have 256GB, but keep in mind, the most common variants of this phone, as well as the one you get through a US carrier, does have 128. So in that sense, the Moto G Power 5G has a bit of an advantage. First of all, having double the storage with, again, 256 versus 128, and microSD card expansion too. So if storage is really important to you, then I would definitely go with the Moto G Power 5G. On the other hand, with 128GB, for the average user, honestly, this is really going to be plenty. So if you do want a good amount of storage, but you don't really need that much, and you don't mind not having microSD card expansion, the S21 FE will still be perfectly fine. Now for security features, both phones have Face Unlock, and they both have fingerprint scanners. With the Moto G Power 5G, it's on the power key, and with the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE, it's in the display. But starting with the Moto G Power 5G, let's give them a try. There we go, one more time. And there we go. And now for the S21 FE. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see, both fingerprint scanners worked real well, no issues at all. And again, remember, both phones have Face Unlock too, so if you want to use that instead, you always can. For the camera setups, up front, both phones have nice looking hole punch designs for the selfie cameras. With the Moto G Power 5G, this camera is 16 megapixels, and with the S21 FE, this one is 32. Then on the back, both phones have triple camera setups. With the Moto G Power 5G, we get a 50 megapixel main camera, a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera, and a 2 megapixel macro camera. With the S21 FE, we get a 12 megapixel main camera, an 8 megapixel telephoto lens, and a 12 megapixel ultra wide camera. Then for video, with the Moto G Power 5G, we get a max recording quality of 1080p in both the rear and front cameras. And with the S21 FE, this phone can record in 4K in both the rear and front cameras. So in general, feature wise, the camera setups are pretty different. With the Moto G Power 5G, the only kind of advantage this phone has is that, again, it does have a dedicated macro camera, but with the S21 FE, with the telephoto lens, you can get those close-up detailed images. And in addition to this, of course, with the telephoto lens, you're also going to get much better zoom. And this phone does have an ultra-wide camera too, whereas unfortunately, the Moto G Power 5G doesn't. And then of course, if you're recording lots of videos and you want to get that higher resolution, the S21 FE will have an advantage there too. Now to give you an idea of what they can do, first, here's some pictures taken with the Moto G Power 5G. Overall, especially considering this is more of an affordable phone, I do think the photo quality here is pretty good, and in most cases, it's probably going to be all most people need. If you're doing something like taking photos for Instagram, for example, it will get the job done, and honestly, you really don't need to go spend a bunch of money on a high-end device, because again, I feel like in most situations, this photo quality is really plenty good enough. And then here's some pictures taken with the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE. Now this is not going to be surprising, considering the S21 FE is in general a much higher end device, but I feel like these photos are significantly better. So while this quality isn't really necessary for basic daily use, if you're really taking a lot of pictures and that's one of the main things you're doing with your phone, the S21 FE will definitely be worth getting over the Moto G Power 5G. But again, in general, I feel like for most people, the photo quality we get with the Moto G Power 5G is still going to be perfectly fine. So aside from that, it really comes down to features. If you want an ultra-wide camera, a telephoto lens, and the option to record 4K videos, you will want to go with the S21 FE. But if your camera needs are a bit more basic, the Moto G Power 5G will be perfectly fine. For the RAM and processor, with the Moto G Power 5G, we're getting 6GB of RAM with the MediaTek Dimensity 930 processor. With the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE, we're getting 6GB of RAM here as well, with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 888 5G processor. Overall, when it comes to performance, as I'm sure you could probably guess, the Galaxy S21 FE is significantly faster. So if you're going to be on your phone a bit more, especially doing more demanding activities, this is definitely something to keep in mind. That being said though, on the other hand, for what it is, the Moto G Power 5G is really not bad, and I mean, it's a $300 entry-level 5G phone. So for what it is, I do think the performance we're getting here is still pretty impressive. For more basic daily activities like web browsing, social media, streaming content like videos and music, and maybe some light mobile gaming, this phone still will be perfectly fine. And if that's really all you're doing, if you're not really going to be on your phone all day doing stuff like high-performance mobile gaming that's a bit more demanding, then yeah, on one hand, the S21 FE is still going to be noticeably faster, but you probably don't need this much performance. But of course, if you're going to be on your phone a bit more, doing more demanding activities, or maybe you just really want the faster phone between the two, then yeah, in that case, the S21 FE will have a significant advantage. Now I did run a benchmark test on each phone using Geekbench 6, and here are the results I got. So as you can see here, again, the S21 FE is significantly faster, so if you do want the faster phone between the two, definitely keep this in mind. But on the other hand, compared to your typical mid-range phone, the Moto G Power 5G is still definitely not half bad. So for the average user, I do still think this phone will get the job done just fine. For the batteries, with the Moto G Power 5G, we're getting a 5000 mAh battery. This supports 15W fast charging, and with the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE, we're getting a 4500 mAh battery, and this phone supports 25W fast charging. And in addition to this, the S21 FE does have wireless charging too, so if you do want that feature, definitely keep this in mind. But overall, clearly here, with a 5000 mAh battery versus 4500, the battery life with the Moto G Power 5G is going to be at least a bit better. In my experience, it's not terrible with the S21 FE, but it's not the greatest either, especially considering with stuff like a 120Hz dynamic AMOLED display, for example, it is going to drain the battery a bit, and yeah, you can lower the refresh rate if you want, but I feel like with a phone like this, you're probably not going to want to. So in general, if the battery is a bit more important to you, then the Moto G Power 5G will have an advantage. For the software, both phones have Android 13, which is great, but keep in mind with the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE, despite this phone being a bit older, when it comes to software support, it will have an advantage. I believe this phone will be getting Android 14, 15, and 16, whereas with the Moto G Power 5G, Motorola's software support, at least for their 5G phones, has been getting a bit better over the past couple years. This phone should at least get Android 14, if not Android 15 too, but it's probably not going to get 16. Now, I could be wrong, but if you really want software support you can actually rely on, I would definitely go with the Samsung. But if you're in a situation where maybe you replace your phone every year anyway, the Moto G Power 5G is still going to be perfectly fine. As far as other features go, unfortunately the Moto G Power 5G really doesn't have a whole lot. On one hand, it has a headphone jack, whereas the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE, unsurprisingly considering this is pretty much a flagship phone, doesn't have a headphone jack. But the S21 FE has NFC, whereas unfortunately for whatever reason, the Moto G Power 5G doesn't. I don't know why Motorola isn't giving their 5G phones NFC, or at least very few of them. I know the Moto G Stylus 5G 2022 has it, but honestly at this point in 2023, pretty much every non-Motorola 5G phone has NFC. It's such a standard, common feature now that having it is really an expectation. But in general, if you do like to use tap and pay, of course, then between these two, you will want to go with the S21 FE. And again, this phone does have wireless charging too, so definitely a good feature to have. But in conclusion, which of these phones is better? Now, in general, considering the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE is a much higher end device, it kind of goes without saying that on paper, this phone is definitely the better device here. Despite the Moto G Power 5G being a little bit larger display wise, the image quality with S21 FE is going to be a lot better, especially when it comes to brightness and viewing angles. The S21 FE also has a lot more camera features and just better camera quality in general. It's significantly faster, and it has features like NFC and wireless charging that are really going to give you a more premium experience. On the other hand though, again, the Moto G Power 5G is slightly larger, which some people might like. It also has a lot more storage and microSD card expansion, which again the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE doesn't. And the Moto G Power 5G also has a larger battery and a headphone jack. And something else to keep in mind here is the price. On one hand, with the Moto G Power 5G, factory unlocked at full price, this phone is around $299, whereas with the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE, at full retail price it was around $699, but honestly at this point in 2023, I feel like in the US at least, very few people are going to be paying that for this phone. I've seen it on Amazon for as low as $329, and if you can get this phone for like barely over $300, then I would definitely choose it over the Moto G Power 5G because honestly with the S21 FE, price being equalized, you're getting a lot more value for the money. But on the other hand, if you're in a place maybe outside the US for example, or really anywhere where the S21 FE is significantly more expensive, then in that case, you might want to consider going with the Moto G Power 5G unless you really want the extra performance, better camera quality, and more premium features in general. But this concludes my comparison between the Motorola Moto G Power 5G and the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE. Again, if you want to learn more about either phone individually, definitely check out the description where I am linking to several other videos about them, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalipa's Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.